So if somebody was to ask you whether or not Jesus done away with the law, or if somebody was to come to you saying that Jesus did away with the law, where would you take them first?
Oh, wow. Well, hey, let's think about this for a moment. Why would anyone say that? Let's explore that thought.
So, I mean, that's deep because it goes back really far. And I don't want to get too complex, so I'll give you a simple answer. Somebody would ask that because, in general Christianity today, I'm just going to generalize it, no matter if it's Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, Baptist, Methodist, Charismatic, what you pick your flavor. So the common census is that Jesus, he came and he fulfilled the law. And since he fulfilled the law, now we don't have to do anything that's ceremonial. We don't have to do anything that's civil. We only have to try to do the moral components of the law. And those moral components are usually summarized in the 10 commandments. Now, out of those 10 commandments, only 9 commandments are applicable because Jesus fulfilled the Sabbath. But even though there's 9 commandments, there's 2 more commandments because, the 2 greatest commandments, we have to love God and we have to love our neighbor. All right. So there's really 11 commandments. But with those 11 commandments, you flip to Acts 15, and then you have those 4 commandments. So those are kind of in the mix somewhere. But long story short, the general consensus is, hey, don't you know you don't have to wear tzitzit anymore? You don't have to wear fringes anymore. You don't have to observe Shabbat anymore. Jesus did all that for us. And since he did it, we no longer have to do it. And as a matter of fact, if you attempt to do it, you're putting yourself under the law, and therefore you're putting yourself under a curse. So that seems to be the general thing. Hey, Jesus got the victory. We've been delivered from the law, brother. Haven't you read Paul? So where would you take them first?
So actually, I find that very ironic because their argumentation, as you articulated it just now, is that Jesus kept the ceremonial laws for us, and so we don't have to keep them. Jesus kept the civil laws for us, so we no longer have to keep them. But why does this not apply to the moral law? Because even in their account, Jesus also kept the moral laws for us. Right?
Right.
So they're treating it very, inconsistently there. They have to give some kind of lip service to the moral law, right? Because even they know it's ridiculous to say that we no longer have to keep the moral laws today. It's ridiculous. Even they know that. And yet they do not apply the same principle to say that, oh, Jesus kept the moral law, and therefore we don't have to keep the moral law today. So to me, that itself is a self-refuting argument which demonstrates that the line of thought is already invalid to begin with.
Right. So in walking through this conversation a few times before with a few different people, that's when the conversation would shift, and then they would go on to say, well, the civil and the ceremonial law are for the Jews, and I'm not Jewish, so only the moral law applies to me.
Yeah, they have said that. And if you ask them to prove it, they will point you to verses in the biblical law where it says, the Lord spoke to Moses, speak to the children of Israel, and they say, there you go. See, that's only for the Jews.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with that is the 10 commandments
Mm-hmm.
in the 2 places where they are introduced, in Exodus chapter 20 and Deuteronomy chapter 5. In both places, it literally says, it is written that Jehovah spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel. And then the 10 commandments are listed. So if these people are consistent, and that's their problem, they are not consistent, right? They have to point to, oh, look, it says to the children of Israel, and therefore it's only for the Jews there. But then they don't do the same to the 10 commandments when it is literally written that Jehovah says to speak to the children of Israel. All right? So even the 10 commandments are written, prima facie to the children of Israel, and yet these Christians still think it's applicable to us, right? So in other words, this implies that just because a commandment is directed at the children of Israel, this does not mean that it is only for them and for no one else.
Now watch this, okay? And I heard everything you just said, but let me push back since I've had this conversation plenty of times. Let me push back. Well, you're right in what you say. However, the moral law is repeated in the New Covenant, in the New Testament. Anything that is retaught or repeated, those apply to us because we're in the New Testament. We're in the New Covenant. We're New Covenant believers. Therefore, whatever the New Covenant teaches is what we're under.
Yeah. And to that I say, what a silly ad hoc cop-out, right? Because since when, where did this rule come from? Where you would only keep commandments that are repeated in the New Testament. Where did this rule come from? Someone picked it out of thin air, because there is nothing in the Bible that says you shall only keep commandments that are repeated in the New Testament. As though if were not repeated, then we don't have to keep them. There is no such principle found anywhere in the text of Scripture. Neither Jesus nor his earliest followers had that kind of conception in mind. All right. So I mean, first of all, that's out of the bat. It sounds like an ad hoc thing to justify not keeping certain commandments. Even Jesus taught things like, if you have something against your brother, leave the gift at the altar. That's not the altar in your Roman Catholic Church. That's the altar of the temple he's talking about. All right? So even if you use that ridiculous standard, it still falls flat on your face, because many components of what we would call ceremonial and civil are found repeated in the New Testament.
Right. So, I mean, I think with that, we should actually just go to what Yeshua the Christ, Hamashiach for our pronomian listeners, what Jesus actually taught. And I think if you would agree, that would be Matthew chapter 5, starting at verse 17. This says it quite clearly, explicitly. So you want me to start reading verse 17? You want me to read the Greek or you want me to read the English?
Oh, do both, like I did with the Hebrew.
No, I don't read. I don't read Greek.
Right.
Give me a few years, I'll start. But starting at verse 17, this is Matthew chapter 5. Do not think that I come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. I'm gonna let you go.
All right. So I know that people have, read this verse in such a way. Oh, look, Jesus fulfilled the law, and therefore we don't have to keep them today. And that is a very irresponsible way to read the Bible, right? On several levels, as we will demonstrate. I mean, first of all, it's important to read the whole verse, isn't it? Imagine if we just read the first 3 words of this verse in English. Do not think. Oh, there we go. Jesus said, do not think. If you want to read the Bible in that way, you can, but it's utterly ridiculous and irresponsible, right? So, and people often zoom in to that last part. I have come to fulfill them. There we go. Jesus has fulfilled the law, and therefore we don't have to today. Let's read the whole thing. Do not think, he says, that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets, right? So first off, that first part is already not well dealt with when people use it in a way to say that we don't have to keep God's laws today, right? He says, I have not come to abolish, right? Normally, how people have taken that is, no. I did not come to just say that the law is, utterly invalidated. Rather, I came to fulfill the law, and the result is that you no longer have to keep them today, right? So you no longer have to keep them today, not because I abolished it, but because I fulfilled it. That's how people read it today, all right? The upshot is still the same. You don't have to keep it today, but the reason why you don't have to keep it today is different, right? It's not that I abolished it, but I fulfilled it. But either way, you don't have to keep it today. All right, so the first thing is, what does it mean that he did not come to abolish the law or the prophets, right? So that word abolish, in the original Greek text, if we look at the Greek text, it says, me nomisiete hoti ilthon katalyse ton nomon e tus prophetas, right? I did not come to abolish. Now, the word for abolish there is katalyse, all right? If you look up a dictionary, you'll have to look up the word katalyo. That is the dictionary form of the word, all right? And it means, I have it here, this is the BDAG lexicon. I don't think you have it there. I'm not sure, but it says here. It has a few different meanings, and the meaning that makes sense in this context is to cause to no longer, to cause to be no longer in force, abolish, annul, make invalid. Okay, so the meaning here is to cause to no longer be in force. So notice, no matter what you think about what it means that Jesus fulfilled the law, it is very clear that the one thing he did not come to do, the one thing that did not happen, is that he caused the law or the prophets to be no longer in force. All right? In other words, no matter how you interpret this text, all right, the result is that the law and the prophets are still in force. That's the first point, right? Anything to say about that?
Yeah, just real quick. And the sources I have for this are kind of later, so I kind of didn't want to bring it up. But would you think, not would you think, but like, what is your view about this being idiomatic, to abolish or to fulfill? Meaning, in the King James is what I'm used to. We got the ESV here, but it says, don't think I came to destroy, because I've always understood this as, in context with what he says a few verses later, that the one that destroys the law literally teaches or relaxes, or he teaches the law improperly, or relaxes the law, or neglects certain aspects of the law. Therefore, he's considered to be destroying the law, because he's breaking it and teaching others to break it. And a synonym for that, the breakage of the law, would be destruction, destroying. In contrast to him not teaching the law inaccurately, would be for that person to teach and do the law accurately, which would be fulfill. So that's kind of how I've always viewed this. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's clearly idiomatic. I mean, the word katalio itself means to destroy, but you
Right.
can't literally destroy the law, right? It's not a tangible thing that you can destroy. And so many translations correctly render this idiomatically, right?
Right.
In this context, abolish. He did not come to invalidate the law, in other words, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we will have the verses later on, which again mitigate against the popular interpretation, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
And the only reason I brought that up is because I seen it in the Talmud. I seen this contrast between destroying and fulfilling. Of course, it's Hebraic, well, rabbinic, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
and that being connected to whether or not somebody fulfills the mitzvot or teaches the mitzvot properly. And for me, even though that's such a later, like I don't want to read that into this text, it just fits so well based on the later verses that he goes on to teach in verse 19. So um, I would say, even though I can't prove it, I would suggest that this would be in line with rabbinic verbiage. You know, it's Jesus wasn't speaking out of a vacuum. He didn't come and just make up a whole bunch of stuff. He came with revelation, of course. He came to reveal, of course, but he spoke in the paradigm that he was in. He was a Jewish rabbi. So when he uses this terminology of destroy or fulfill, I I I really lean towards him using terminology that was common in his day, and everybody would have understood him to mean he didn't come to relax anything. He didn't come to literally do away with anything, but he came to
Yeah.
uphold, to fill up, and to magnify. He came to magnify the law, not to negate it. So that's my 2 cents on this. And I think, like I said, based on verse 19, the proof is in the pudding with with my interpretation of how I'm looking at this, not only as idiomatic, but within the Jewish paradigm, as far as like how teachers would teach then, within that paradigm, the verbiage that they would use, I think we can literally trace that to later Jewish writings, how we see this same terminology used.
I'm sure we can, and but even the text itself is sufficient to demonstrate that.
Right,
You know,
right.
when Jesus said, "I came not to abolish, but to fulfill," right? What does it mean that he fulfilled the law? And for many Christians, you know, Jesus fulfilled the law in the sense that he kept it in our place. Now that is true in a sense, but that's not what he means here.
Right here, yep.
Here, in this context, the word fulfill means to teach the law in its fullness,
Right.
right? Rather than a watered down or compromised version of God's law. He is restoring it to its full and pristine intention, the way that Jehovah intended it when he first gave it, right?
Right.
I think he said this in the context of, you know, the scribes and the Pharisees during his day, watering down and adding on their own commandments of men and traditions, you know, that he will rebuke them for later on,
Yep.
isn't it? And so I think it is in that context that he came into, where Jewish leaders have already abused, misused, and distorted Jehovah's law, that he says, I did not come to abolish, but to fulfill. All right. The concern there would be when he taught his version of God's law, the people around him might suspect him, because the way that he was teaching Jehovah's law is not the same as they have been taught under the scribes and the Pharisees. All right, so I think Jesus here is clarifying that what he is doing is to teach the fullness of the law, in contrast to the scribes and Pharisees, who
Mhm.
clearly are not doing the same.
Right, right. Okay. I think we aired that verse out. So you want me to read verse 18?
Let's do it.
All right. For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not an iota, not a dot will pass from the law until all is accomplished.
Yeah. So, right there, verse 18 is the death knell to the popular interpretations of verse 17, right? So, when people read verse 17 as though God's law is no longer valid for them, that very idea is abolished in the very next verse, right? Look at the first word of the verse in English. For. The word for indicates that Jesus is giving a reason for what he had said before, right? Why is it that he did not come to abolish God's law but to fulfill? Because until heaven and earth pass away, not an iota and not a dot will pass from the law until all is accomplished. In other words, Jesus did not come to abolish God's law because it is impossible. It's impossible for Jesus to abolish God's law because not even an iota or a dot can pass from God's law until all is accomplished. In Greek, panta genite, all is accomplished. And dear friends, all has not been accomplished yet.
But the pushback would be when Jesus was on the cross, what did he say? It is finished. And they would
Yeah,
draw
what is
that.
finished? Yeah.
Okay, you're right. And that's my question. Like, what was he talking about? Let's but they would
Yeah.
jump to hear is it's all been fulfilled. You know, he fulfilled it.
Yeah, so by the way, when he said it is finished on the cross, it's a totally different word, isn't it? Right now, I think this comes, this misconception came because I think the KJV said something like, until all is until all is completed or finished or something like that,
I think
right?
it says fulfilled.
Fulfilled, right? And then that's why probably I'm guessing this is why that's probably why people link until all is fulfilled in the KJV to Jesus's cry, "It is finished." But in Greek, it's actually a different term, right? On the cross, he cried "teteleste," which is a totally different term from what is here, "panta genite." You know, so I don't think that the link is legitimate. All right. When he said it is finished, I think he meant that the prophecies regarding his death have been fulfilled and not that the law was done away, right?
Right.
Actually, I would link it to Psalm 22. Remember when he was on the cross, one of the first things that he said is, my God, why have you forsaken me?" That's from Psalm 22, right? And how does Psalm 22 end? It ends by saying, you know, it is done, right? The Lord has done this. In other words, it is finished. So I think he was referring to that, right? He was referring to the fulfillment, the finishedness of Psalm 22. The prophecy there has been, fulfilled when he died. And he had to say that before he died because he can't say it after he has died, logically, right? So that's what he means. I don't think he means to say that all has been accomplished, because clearly all has not been accomplished, right? There are still prophecies left to be accomplished. His second coming, for example, right? And the resurrection of the dead.
Right. Okay. And I would argue as well, and again, this is I would just, well, let me just say it like this. The fact that he's using heaven and earth to pass away, I would actually link that to Deuteronomy 30:19 and Deuteronomy 31:28, where he talks about where Yah calls heaven and earth as a witness, and in his giving of the Torah and his establishing a covenant with Israel. That's my 2 cents on that. You want to go on to verse 19?
Yeah, let's go on to verse 19.
Therefore, I love this verse. Whoever relaxes one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven.
So right here, if someone had interpreted verse 18 in the way that you said, right? All is accomplished, right? Jesus said it is finished. Therefore, The law has passed away. Verse 19 causes that stupid argument to pass away. Right? It begins in English, it begins with the word therefore.
That's right.
Jesus is making application to what he had just said in verse 18. Since the law will not pass away until all is accomplished, therefore, whoever relaxes one of the least of these commandments and teaches to others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. Now, this means at least, we will explore later what it means to be called least in the kingdom of heaven.
Mm-hmm.
But this implies, at the very least, that the law continues to be valid such that people will be held accountable to and evaluated according to Jehovah's law. It means, at the least, that.
Yeah, and that's big. But I just want to tie it together real quick. Again, therefore, whoever relaxes, like you said, there's a therefore, so you got to figure out what it's there for. It's the cliche saying, and here in the States. So just going back up, because I see the contrast here. Do not think that I've come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. And then, for truly I say unto you, until heaven and earth pass away, not an iota, not a dot will pass away from the law until all has been accomplished. Therefore, whoever relaxes one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. So again, drawing on that interpretation for what it actually means, what does the idiom mean as far as destroying or abolishing, in contrast to fulfilling. I think there's a direct correlation in verse 17 with verse 19. If somebody destroys the law, they relax it and they teach others to neglect it. But when somebody fulfills it, they actually do the law properly and teach others the same. So that's
Yeah,
what I got.
actually, there is a correlation drawn. Actually, Jesus draws this correlation by using a term in Greek that is similar to the word for abolish in verse 17, right? So in verse 19, when he says relaxes, he's using the Greek verb lyo, whereas in verse 17, when he said destroy, he used katalio. Okay, it's katalio, but I'm trying to demonstrate the sameness, right?
Right.
Here it's lyo, and in verse 17 is kata, the kata prefix, and the same verb, lyo, all
Oh,
right?
wow.
But the kata prefix, all right, in verse 17, intensifies it, right? It's intensified, right? So Jesus did not come to katalio, he did not come to destroy, get rid of it totally, all right? And therefore, because of that, in verse 19, we should not lyo, we should not even loosen any part of Jehovah's law, right? So it's both extremes. Jesus did not do the extreme katalio, destroy, totally unloosen the whole thing, right? And therefore we have no right to even lyo, do it even a bit.
Right. Wow. That's good. Didn't know that. Love it. Okay, so just real quick, I'm gonna let you know where some thoughts are from having this conversation before. Because when I point to this, when people would argue all the same arguments that we've already been through, and then I would point to this, I'm like, look, he's saying here, therefore, whoever relaxes one of the least of these commandments. And they're like, yeah, don't you see? He's saying these commandments as in the commandments he's fixing to teach. Okay. My pushback would be, well, then that doesn't make sense with not an iota or a dot, a jot or a tittle would pass from the law, because the things that he's fixing to teach in the verses coming, of course, are not written yet. So it doesn't make sense to me. But just throwing that out there, when people read, a lot of people read this, they look at it as he's there to establish the law of Christ in place of the law of Moses. And as a matter of fact, they would even use prophetic symbolism saying, hey, how did Moses receive the law? On a mountain, right? Where was Jesus when he established this law? You see, there's a parallel, you know. But we're going to get into what he actually did. All right, you want me to keep going with verse 20?
Let me point out something. I think you said it right? That's really how people argue. But, just because there is a parallel doesn't mean that you have interpreted the parallel accurately,
Right.
There is a parallel, right? No one's denying that. But what does the parallel mean? And I think many people have illegitimately mishandled that parallel, right? And I think you pointed out right that because of what Jesus said in verse 18 about the iotas and the dots, right? He is making intentional reference to the already written law of Moses. He
Mhm.
wasn't talking about the things that he was going to say that obviously have not yet been written, right? He was referencing when he says the law, right? Verse 18 makes it very clear that he was talking about the law of Moses.
Mhm.
And given what he is saying here, right, that the law of Moses will not pass away, therefore, whoever relaxes one of these commandments, referring to the commandments of written in the law of Moses, I don't think Jesus himself, in this Sermon on the Mount, or any time for that matter, would say anything that contradicts or compromise on the law of Moses.
Right.
I think that makes reasonable sense. So even if you say he's establishing the law of Christ, what is the law of Christ?
Hmm.
But nothing more than the law of Moses, most fully taught, as Jesus had said, right? I'm
Mhm.
sure that Jesus was not a false advertiser. I know that, sometimes the box says you will get this, and that, it promises, that the product promises in the advertisement to deliver some benefits to you. But when you use the product, you find that it's not true. Jesus is not the same. When he says that he has not come to abolish the law of Moses, but to fulfill, fully teach the law of Moses, I think, just a wild idea, I think that Jesus did exactly what he said he will do.
Hmm. No, that's right. All right. So we're in verse 20, right?
Yep.
All right. So for I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. That's crazy. It's not crazy, but it should bring some reverence.
Yeah. It should bring some trembling because right now, here in verse 20, Jesus is highlighting, emphasizing the seriousness of the matter, right? This is not just something that we can agree to disagree with. He makes a person's everlasting destiny hinge upon this righteousness. All right. um yes, you see, even I am stuttering right now, isn't it? um
And there's
yeah,
a lot.
anything you want to say about that? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot there, but I don't want to go down the rabbit trail. I want to stay on the track that we're on. So I'm going to go to verse 21, if that's okay with you.
Oh no, let me point out one thing.
Gotcha.
Right, so in verse 19, it says, whoever relaxes, let's just scroll up to verse 19. Yeah. Whoever relaxes one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. You know how some people have taken this?
That
Oh,
they'll
at
be
least we'll be in the kingdom of heaven.
exactly.
All right. But I think verse 20 mitigates against that. Verse 20 tells us that Jesus didn't mean that. All right. So then what does it mean to be called least in the kingdom of heaven? I don't think it means that you are in the kingdom of heaven, but rather in the kingdom of heaven, people will call you least.
Yeah,
even though
that's,
you yourself are not there. I think that's what it means.
and I didn't read it like that until after I became Torah observant. And that is scary. That is extremely scary. And on top of that, I think about all the things I taught against the law and how I myself have engaged in ministry and literally debated against God's law. And every time I think of something like this, like it brings a fear and trembling. I'm like, oh God, forgive me. And praise Yah, hallelujah, for his grace and his mercy. That while I was yet a sinner, he still sent his beloved son to save me from my wretchedness and my lawlessness. I'm so thankful for that. Um,
Hallelujah.
that's right.
And today you have debated several antinomians, and now you're going on live stream. That's your repentance.
Definitely a change in direction for sure.
Yeah,
So, yeah, are you ready for verse 21?
let's do it.
Okay. You have heard. Oh, I'm sorry. I was just reminded of a debate that I got into.
Because what's it say right here? It says, it was said to those of old. Who are those of
But
old?
what's
It's not
I mean, there's a lot of
contemporaries with Jesus. Who
well,
are
yeah,
those
but
of old? It's the people who received the Decalogue. Do you guys understand what I'm saying? We have to hold this text together completely.
But that's a jump. That's a jump to say
who
those
are
of
those of
old
old?
are all the way. It could be the Tanaim.
You have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council, and whoever says you fool, will be liable to the hell of fire. Um, the reason I started laughing is because when I was in a debate, and I think we were in King James. It says, you have heard it said by them of old. ESV says, you have heard that it was said to those of old. Either way, the apologist I was up against was drawing this back to Moses, meaning like, hey, you see, he's talking about Moses here. And I'm literally in my head like, are we being serious right?
Yeah. So I don't think it's a problem because it appears that he is quoting from the Ten Commandments, isn't it? You shall not murder, right? And then he summarizes the penalty for murder, civil penalty for murder, that whoever murders shall be liable to judgment, right? The problem comes, I think, in certain conceptions of verse 22, where people say, you see, Moses' law is inferior and Christ's law is superior. So he's replacing Moses' law with Christ's law, right? So that's where the problem comes, right? Because he says, you have heard it, but I say, as if he is talking down Moses' law and uplifting his own law. But again, remember, this is verse 21. What did he say in verse 17?
Right.
Right? He said, I did not come to abolish, but to fulfill. Fulfill
Right.
what? In context, he came to fulfill Moses' law. In other words, he came to teach Moses' law in the fullness that it was originally intended by Jehovah.
Right. And the reason I would say that he's not here simply quoting Moses is because, again, sticking with the context, as we read further, he makes quotes that don't refer to anything that Moses said, which lets me know he's not quoting Moses. So when he appears to be quoting Moses, I think what he's doing here, from my perspective in reading this passage in its fullness, I think what he's doing here is he's attacking the relaxation of the law. So, for example, if I'm mad at you, I'm allowed to be mad at you. I'm allowed to hate you. And even the sages say, just don't murder.
Yes.
You see what I'm
Yes.
saying?
I got
So,
you. Yeah.
yes. So, and if you continue, I think it validates my line of reasoning, my line of thought, because he goes on to say things that is not in Torah, that's not in Moses. When he talks about swearing and stuff like that, you shouldn't swear by the altar, you shouldn't swear by this, or so it's for me, seeing other things that he mentions that are not directly taught in Torah lets me know that his source of what he's quoting is not Torah alone.
Right. So, in other words, he is critiquing the contemporary Jewish religious distortions of
Exactly.
Jehovah's law that says, you shall not murder just means you shall not kill the guy, but you can hate him and insult your brother. Whereas
Exactly.
Jesus is pointing out that Jehovah's original intention behind the commandment, you shall not murder, includes not being baselessly angry with your brother
That's
and
right.
insulting your brother.
Right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. Yep. So now I didn't mean to corner you into Matthew 5. Let me just make that known here. I didn't mean to corner you into Matthew 5, because remember the discussion is, did Jesus do away with the law? So, and I'm up for whatever. If you want to keep going through Matthew 5, it's okay with me. If you want to go somewhere else, actually, we are going to run into something on Matthew 5 that you mentioned it before, but I just want everybody to see it. So I guess we can keep going. I'm sorry for that. So verse 22, right?
Yep.
Okay, so but I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council, and whoever says you fool will be liable to the hell of fire.
Yeah. You know, the mention of judgment and counsel, that's part of the civil law, what people call the civil law, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right. But and look at the term for hell. The term there is Gehenna, all right, which corresponds to the Hebrew idiom Gehinnom, all right, which refers to destruction after the resurrection. So your resurrection, you're resurrected, all right. When Messiah comes back, you are resurrected, judged, and destroyed everlastingly. Yeah.
Wow. So we're on 23, right?
Yep.
Okay. Now, just for clarity, well, two things to clarify, because I don't think we clarified, even though we brought it up. We don't believe in the division of the law being civil, or I can't speak for Asher, but
No, I do.
okay, so we don't believe in the division of the law being ceremonial, civil, and moral. In my paradigm, that makes absolutely no sense. Reason being, if you rebel against any of God's commandments, then you're immoral. So you can go right back to Adam in the garden. He was given a commandment: he can eat from any tree, just don't eat from that tree. That was a dietary law. I mean, if you look at it, but Adam rebelled against that commandment. Like, how do you define that? Is that a civil issue? Is that a ceremonial thing? Or is that a dietary infraction? Or is it a moral issue? Obviously, it's a moral issue if you don't have the mind or heart to want to obey God's law. So again, there is no, and Torah doesn't teach this, the Bible doesn't teach this, there is no division of ceremonial, civil, or moral. If you don't do something that God said to do, it's called disobedience. And if you don't repent, you're just in rebellion. And if you're in rebellion against anything that God has said to do, then we would call that being immoral. So that's our position on that. So that was the clarification thing of number one. And I forgot the clarification of number two because I went off on a rant. So we're just going to get into verse 23. You ready?
Yep.
All right. So if you are offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother and then come and offer your gift. Now, I love this because for people that are talking about the law of Christ being established, you're right. He is establishing the proper way to offer sacrifice. You shouldn't have any ought against your brother before you offer a sacrifice. You should go and make things right with your brother. There should be reconciliation. Then you're in a better position internally in order to offer that sacrifice according to the law of Moses.
Yeah.
That's a good mic drop moment right there. We have reached our 1 hour. Professor Asher, I appreciate you. I always love when you come on. I always love taking the back seat to somebody that is far more advanced than me, because I'm here to learn. Also, my heart is that the truth would triumph the traditions of the church. That's what I want to happen, is for truth to prevail, and it will, you know. So I'm thankful for you coming on and sharing your thoughts. You have any closing thoughts?
I also enjoy coming on if it helps, and also to hear your views on things that I might not have thought about. Yeah, even in all my study, I would still have some blind spots. So I am very glad for that.
Amen. Praise God. Well, feel free to comment. Feel free to send in questions that you may have. stayinthevision@gmail.com. Or if you want to disagree, feel free to email me and we can set up a time to go live. Or we can discuss. I'm okay with discussing disagreements via email. I feel like it's a little bit more formal if you're not comfortable with going live. But comments, I can't stand discussing disagreements in comments, although I will do it. But for me, it's just so much better to either have a phone call, or if you're comfortable going on a live, and not to have a I got you moment, even though there may be some. It'd be more so so everybody can learn, and we can build. You can have disagreements without destroying one another or without being mean or anything like that. Because I mean, this stuff is very controversial, as everybody knows. There's a lot of misunderstandings in the church, in modern Christianity. If you tell anybody you keep the law, or we're supposed to keep the law, people shut down, people reject it, people call you a Judaizer, people think you're in a cult. I mean, put label wherever you want to put it, So, but we can actually prove our way of living, as we've been led by the Spirit, is biblical. So it's not only spiritual, and the Torah is spiritual, as Paul would say, it's biblical. But nah, I had fun tonight being the devil's advocate. And I would have to end this debate that we had. Haven't you read Paul? Haven't you read Paul? We should do Paul next. Let's do Paul next. Paul's a lot, though. We'll have to go one book at a time. So ain't no telling. But either way, Toda Reba, y'all rock with your boy, Lahitro. Thank you.